Okay, we are in the bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Beis, and we are on the third to last line, last word on the line. Boy Rovo. So again, yesterday we were discussing the idea of how to quantify rekev, basically. Eric says a rot into the bone. Eric, you'll have to come up with a new line because today we have a bit of a different discussion. So we begin the discussion sort of by continuing from yesterday. We'll get to that in a moment, and then we continue with talking about quite so. We talk about bones without the rot. Okay, now yesterday we were discussing about rekev, all the conditions to have rekev, which makes it extremely common. Right? How many people do you know that stuck their hands into a marble casket after someone was buried unclothed 5 years later, just to pull out a little bit of rekev to give to a Nazir to become tummy? And since that's extremely common, it's absolutely relevant. But we spoke about one of the possible conditions of rekev was that the body has to be whole, complete. Gmara goes on a little bit on a sidetrack, and then we'll go back to the original question of what makes a Nazir tummy, and we'll discuss measurement of bones and what type of bones and how exactly a Nazir becomes tummy to a bone. Okay, before I continue, I should not forget to mention, and I forgot to mention this for many days already. I will be going away for Shabbos. That would be Friday, tomorrow, Shabbos, Sunday. I probably won't be back Monday because Monday I have to go work very early in the morning. So Rabbi Diskin is going to be taking over for the next 4 days. I'll be in New York. My grandfather is donating a Sefer Torah, so he's flying us on. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for your understanding of that. Okay, let's listen.
Not understanding, we have no choice.
Okay, we're on Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Again, third to bottom line, last word in line. This actually is quite relevant. Boy Rava had the following question. So we have a halacha, a Torah law, that if you eat a prohibited food, how much do you need to eat? A kazayas. With the exception if you eat a sheretz. If you eat a bug, one whole bug suffices. Even though obviously many bugs, or maybe even most bugs, are way less than the volume of a kazayas, a large olive. Okay, now the question is as follows. Let's say you have a bug that lost a limb. Okay, this is quite relevant. It happens all the time. You have a bug that lost a limb, but the bug is still alive. Does one violate the Torah prohibition of eating a non-kosher bug? All bugs are non-kosher. Eating a bug, if the bug is alive but missing a limb. What's the question? What does the question really boil down to? Why does a bug need to be whole? Is it because the significance is something that's alive? Right? The significance of eating a whole bug is because a whole bug is alive. It's sort of, or it's the type that would be alive, even though, let's say, it was missing half of its antenna or half of a leg or something like that. It's still alive. Or do we say no? The explanation of why a bug needs to be complete is because it's a shear, it's a measurement. Just like you need to eat a kazayas, you also need to eat a complete bug. It's not related to the fact that typically a complete bug is a type of bug that lives, that could live. And therefore, even if it's missing a small part of the leg, it does not have the penalty of malchus. One didn't violate a shear of eating a bug.
So basically, it's a difference between a shear and a traphus, basically.
I didn't get the second part. What do you mean traphus?
A traphus is an animal that's not going to live more than a year.
Right.
No, most bugs don't live a year, but
yeah.
It's kind of that kind of analogy almost.
Yeah. Correct. It would be whether the bug could live, whether the bug could live or whether it's a shear. And okay. So by Robin, so you have a bug that's missing a limb. Mahu, what's the halacha? Shiur gemir law v'hachaser, I bury gemir law v'ha'ika. Do we say it's a shear and it's missing the shear? In other words, is the idea of a complete unit of a bug a shear? It's a measurement, and ultimately the measurement is a complete bug. If it's missing a limb, it's not a shear. Just like if it's less than a kazayas, it's not a shear of a kazayas. I bury gemir law, or you say no, it's a unit of a living creature, and v'ha'ika, it's still a living creature, or at least if it's of the type that could be a living creature. Amar of Yehudah Niskarta, top of 52a. Rabbi Yehudah Niskarta proves as follows. Tashma, let's examine this. When Torah talks about a person, so there are 8 types of bugs, shrotzim, that have tumah. And when the Torah speaks of the shrotzim, the Torah uses 2 interesting words. The first pasuk says, "Ela hatmeim lachem b'chol hasheretz kol hanegea bohem." Somebody who touches them, yachal b'kulan. I would think he has to touch the entire bug. Talmud Leimer, if you look at the next pasuk, it says v'chol asher yipol mehem, from them. Now, from them presumably means even a part of them. Talmud Leimer bohem. I'm sorry, Talmud Leimer mehem, from them. If it says mehem, I would think that even half a bug would make tumah. Talmud Leimer bohem, it has to be complete, the complete bug. Okay, so how do you have a complete bug that's incomplete? You have to touch a part of the bug whose part is like the whole thing. The rabbis decided that this amount is the amount of a lentil. You can't have chaymet because they have one of the shrotzim is called a chaymet, a snail. And the beginning of its creation is the size of a lentil. That's, I guess, the smallest snail. Okay. So in other words, you need to touch a part of the bug that's at least an adosha big, at least 1 lentil size big. Okay. Now, obviously, this is talking about tumah, but it's quite evident from here that the size of the bug for tumah is a shear. It's a measurement. It's not related to the fact of the bug, how much the bug could live. And therefore, we see from here that the measurement of the size of a bug is a shear. It is a measurement, and therefore, if you have to consume a complete bug, because that the shear is a complete bug, that's the unit. It has nothing to do with the fact that the bug is able to live or not. Amar of Shami kibi'inan shiura debideloy havaka adasha lemitama. 1 second. Okay. So Shami loy. It's not lemon tamid loy neshama. What he's saying is, I'm sorry. Says Rishami that the idea that a measurement is used for tumah could very well be in a scenario where where less than an adosha there is no life. Meaning, we're talking about animals that are large enough that, 1 second. We're talking about animals that, like a chaymet, when the chaymet is born, when the snail is born, if you cut off its leg, it won't survive. It's going to die. And what we're saying is, when you have an animal, we can't survive less than the size of a lentil. So then we say that the minimum shear tumah is a lentil. But if you have an animal, on the other hand, that could survive less than a lentil, maybe there is no shear. Maybe it is the fact that it's alive. And therefore, even if it's less than 1, in other words, it lost a limb, but it could still live, maybe it would still be prohibited. So there wouldn't be any proof from this Gemara. Okay. Now we go to the next Gemara. Hashedra of a Hagalgolas, the spine and the skull. Iboilhu. This is the Gemara's question, which will take us, I think, almost the whole day, almost the entire rest of the day. So what's the question? Shedra Vigalgolas Tanan, Idilma Oy Shedra Eigalgolas. If what exactly becomes Tame? Is it the Shedra and the Galgolas? You need to have both of them together, the skull and the spine together, or does either one suffice to create Tumah? And again, let me rephrase that. It's not to create Tumah, it's to make a Nazir Tame. And remember that we're talking here about Tumas oil. If you have a unit of bone that's less than a half a kav, but greater than a half a grain of barley, it's Tameh b'maga, with touching it, but not b'oil, being in the same room or putting your hand on top of it. If, however, you have a sufficient quantity of bones, or we're talking about critical bones like the skull and the spine, or the skull or the spine, that's sort of the Gemara's question, then the Nazir becomes Tameh b'oil, even if it's less than the measurement of half a kav, like we saw in the Mishnah. Okay, so we're going to go through a bunch of proofs. Amarava, the first proof. Toshma, Shedra Shegirid Raiv Il Olan Shabah. You had a spine, and most of the vertebrae were cracked. Tahira. Is that how also translates? Is it vertebrae? Il Olan. Ilin.
Spinal column, most of its ribs severed.
Ribs. Okay. So our article translates ilin as ribs. So you had the in other words the spine I guess the rib cage isn't complete. Tahira. It's tahar because it's not a complete spine. So once in other words, presumably here the spine doesn't mean just the spine. It means all the bones that are attached to the spine as well. It's a full frame. If that's the translation of ilin is the rib cage. Okay, so what happens if the ribs start cracking off, so the spine isn't complete? It's tahira. So therefore, now we say that the measurement of bones is going to be a measurement of kav, of chatzi kav, or roiva kav. It's not going to be. We won't ascribe significance to the fact that it's the spine, it's the shedra.
So it's such a small.
Again, the Gemara wants to know, typically speaking, bones are matame b'maga once they're a grain of barley. Once they're larger than a grain of barley, you touch them, you become tamei. In order to become tamei b'oil, you need to have one of a few options. Either you have a measurement of bones, chatzi kav, or you have critical bones. We'll explain what that means in a moment. Or you have the majority of a person's height in bones, or a majority of the bones in a body. We'll soon see. It's very easy to get a majority. Both hands, both feet are 120 bones, 30 in each. And then you need 5 more bones because there are 248 bones. So having 125 bones will give you a majority of the bones. So if you have those bones plus 5 more, you could fit into a very small package. That's way less than a roiv hakav. Okay, what are critical bones? Critical bones are the spine and the skull. And the question is it or and? So now you have a guy who you find a obviously a Jew's skeleton, and the rib cage is broken. Do we consider that to be? We consider that to be tahar. Why is it tahar? Because now the spine isn't complete. Hold on a second. Maybe you need to have the spine and the skull. This is a clear reference that you don't need the skull, because the Mishnah seems to indicate that the spine alone would suffice. But if it's broken, obviously, then it doesn't cause tumah. If it's broken, then it goes into the other category of bones, which means that it would either need to be a roiva hakav to create tumas oil, or it would need to be, or you need to touch it in order, if it's greater than a grain of barley, to be able to become tummy. Revakav is a unit. How much is Revakav? Not exactly sure.
Oh, okay, it's just.
It's a measurement. Yeah.
Nothing, wouldn't have a definition.
Obviously, you take the bones, put it into a what do they call it, volumetric cylinder, and measure it.
Oh,
You know,
it's like-
so you can figure out exactly how many, what the volume in ounces is.
Assuming it's all ground up, then you can measure it like that.
No, not necessarily. It doesn't have to be ground up. You could put it in.
Theoretically speaking, to figure out how, okay.
No, if it was ground, you can measure it by a tape
Yeah,
measure. But
right.
if it's not ground, you have to use a cylinder to measure it. Okay.
Count that reckon is 1.2 liters.
1.2 liters. So a half a kav, a reva kav would be about a half a liter or a quarter of a liter. Okay.
2 pints in a bit.
Okay. Ubekever afilu mashaberes mefurekas tmeib mipnei hakever mitzarf mipnei hakever mitzarfa. Add in the Tosfos adds in. So basically, if you find a broken frame, broken rib cage inside a gravesite, the caver makes it as if it's one unit. So therefore, it still has a significance of a full spinal frame, and therefore it becomes tummy. Okay, so what's the proof here? Time is from the girit. The reason is because the rib cage was cracked. Haloi girit, but if the rib cage wasn't cracked, tummy. Then we say there is tumas oil, right? Obviously, talking about a case where it's less than a roiv hakav. Shmamina oishad or gogolos ktani. You see here that the spine alone suffices, and presumably the skull alone suffices to create tumas oil, even when it doesn't meet the threshold of the measurement of quantity of bones. Samara says no, halak tani. That's an incorrect interpretation. This brisa is not coming to say that if the frame was not cracked, it would be tahar. The brisa is coming to tell you that if the frame is cracked, it's certainly tahar. But what if it's not cracked? It depends. If it maybe it has to be complete, maybe not. We don't know. That's sort of our question. But when it's cracked, everyone agrees that it's tahar. Toshma, next proof. Rabbi Yehudah says, Shisha Dvarim Rabbi Kiva Mitame v'Chacham Mitarim. Rabbi Kiva was, there were 6 items that Rabbi Kiva said is Tameh and the rabbi said is Tahar. V'chazer by Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Kiva changed his mind. Umayisa Sheviu Kuba Malaya Atzamis. There's a story where they brought a bag of bones, the basic Knesset Shel Tarsiyim, to the study hall of the coppersmiths. V'nichu ba'avir. So obviously, you don't want to bring a bag of bones to a shul because then everyone becomes tummy. So they must have had a hole somewhere in the ceiling, and somebody went onto the roof and dropped it in, so that the students were able to look inside of it without actually becoming tummy. So they made a hole in the roof. They dropped in the bag of bones, and they said that a Nazir obviously walked over this stuff, or a Kayan or whatever. Probably a Nazir, because a Nazir even if it's unintentional, he would still have to cut his hair. Okay, v'nichu ba'aver. So, and they're trying to evaluate this question.
The physician entered in all the physicians.
Yeah. So the question here is the rabbis are trying to figure out: is there a measurement of bones? So what do? They summon v'nichnas to this Raifa. They add to this the doctor come in, call Raifa Mima, and all the doctors that came in with him. But when they said Ein kan shedra mimei sechot, they said there's no spine from one body here. Now, presumably, it was a scenario where there wasn't a quantity of bones either. So there was no half a liter worth of bones volumetrically. So he looks at the bones and he says there's no complete spine. Okay, hold on. Let's say there was a complete spine from one person. Taima de like a shedra de michada ha'ika. Let's say there was a spine from one person. I shedra I gilgailas de michada nazir megalechala. However, if there was a spine or a skull from just one person, then we would say that a Nazir has to cut his hair over this. In other words, a Nazir became Tameh, Tumas oil. Shmamina, Aishedra, Ayagalos Tanan. This is a proof that it's either the spine or the skull, not both. It's not necessary to have both together to create Tumas oil, of which a Nazir would have to cut his hair over if he became Tameh. Okay, so Gemara says no, not a proof. Let me buy a kamar. this brisa is telling me as follows. Not only was there no spine or no skull from one body, even a spine or a skull from one person there wasn't. In other words, the rabbis immediately understood that there was no spine and skull from one person. But Tudis said even to the extent that even a spine from one person there wasn't. 1 second. Okay, Texas points out a very obvious problem here. You think of a bag of bones, and you think you have to call in a doctor to figure out if it was from one person, right? What does that presumably mean? They were cracked. Hold on, we just learned that a cracked spine is tahar. So what are you calling in? So if the rib cage is whole, you'd imagine that it doesn't take a doctor to figure out a rib cage is whole. So Taisa says what would happen was these bones were actually all in a kever. They were all in one burial site. So he said kever is mitzarfa. It puts it all together. So even if it's cracked, it'd still be tumas oil. So therefore, they needed a doctor to say that it wasn't from one body. So there was a bunch of shards, right? Well, it was from one gravestone, but apparently, obviously, it wasn't. This could, it's today we know where every gravestone is. We use these expensive slabs of concrete, but it wasn't always like that. Especially you go to Israel today and they find, obviously, like I said, they find grave sites everywhere. But often you have, a bunch of people that either were buried together or they were buried in a way that now looks like they were buried together. Even if it could be through over time, things got, messed up or whatever. Okay. So basically, in other words, the question here was, is there a skull and a spine from one person? It could be that it was an and. In other words, you need to have a skull and a spine. And Tuda said, not only does that not exist, but even a spine from one person doesn't exist. Okay, so there's no proof. It could be that you need to have the skull and the spine. Could be you need to have a skull or the spine. In other words, either it's together, they constitute a significant amount of bone, even less than the share, or either one on its own constitutes a significant bone. Okay. Tashma, next attempt. Miminyana. Let's count the 6 things. Mahin, what are the 6 things? Mahin shishit varim shor bekivim tam v'cham. What were the 6 things that Rabbi Kiva held were tummy and the rabbis held were tahar? They are as follows: Al aver min hameis shabami shnei mesim, the limb of a dead person that was created from 2 different people. Al aver min achai shabami shnei bnei adam, on a limb from a live person that came from 2 different people. V'chatzi kavat samais, half a measurement of bones. Shababin shnei mesim, that came from 2 different people. Revius dam habam shnei mesim, or a measurement of blood that came from 2 people. Val etzem kisaira shenechlik l'shnayim, or if you have a bone that was the size of a piece of a grain of barley, but then it was split into 2, even if it comes from the same person. V'ashedra v'hagagailas. Okay, I meant to count along here, so let's count along here. Aver min hames is 1. Aver min achai is 2. Chatzi kavat samis is 3. Revius dam is 4. Etzem kisaira is 5. And hashedra and hagagailas is 6. Obviously, that tells me that shedra and gagailas are 1 unit. Otherwise, it would be 7 units. So you see here that you need to do the shedra and the gagailas, because if they were separate, it turns out there were actually 7 categories. Okay. So if you'll tell me, that it's either the shedra or the gagailas, hani shiva havin. There are really 7, not 6. So Gemara says you're right. There actually, it could be that there actually are 7. Why is it counted as 6? Because one of the other ones isn't counted. Which one isn't counted? In other words, the rabbis disagreed in 6. There are actually 7 listed. The rabbis disagreed about 6 of them. One of them wasn't the rabbis. It was the opinion of an individual. The Tanya we learned, if you have a bone the size of a grain of barley that's split into 2, Rabbi Kiva mitame, Rabbi Kiva says it's tamei, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri mitar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says it's tar. And we don't know what the rabbi's opinion is. So therefore it's not counted as a 7. There really are 7 listed, but only 6 of them are debates with the rabbis. The Ibai saying, we'll give a few answers here. The Ibai saying, Kiktani Aver min Ames, Aver min Achai like Tani. An Aver from a live person is not counted among the 7 because we're talking about dead people. So it's true that it is a debate between Rabbi Kiva and the rabbis, but it's not listed because the rabbis are only giving significance to the ones that are from a dead person, not the ones from a live person. Ibai saying another possibility. Kiktani kol hechad enozim megaleach ala hiloi.
What do you mean by from the life?
So if a person loses a limb, God forbid, then and that, let's say we find a limb, we know the limb is from 2 live people. Yes, two half limbs. So according to Rabbi Kiva, that is tamei ba'ohel, and according to the Rabbanan, it's not tamei ba'ohel. But it could be it isn't counted because we're not talking about live people. We're talking about limbs. We're talking about people that are deceased. Okay, everybody saying another possibility is we're talking about tumas oil. So in other words, the brisa really does have 7, but one of them doesn't create tumas oil. Which one? Lafuki etzem kisayra delay. A bone the size of a grain of barley is not mitame ba'oil. It's only mitame b'maga, with touching, or master heset. But oil, it's not mitame. Oil is only when you have a measurement of bones, roiv height, roiv number, or a significant bone, which would either be the skull and the spine, or the skull or the spine, which is a question we're dealing with. These by Sema, another possibility. We're talking about all the scenarios where Rabbi Kiva changed his mind. In other words, there really are 7 listed in the brisa, but one of them Rabbi Kiva never changed his mind. Which one was that? A measurement of blood from 2 different people. Rabbi said to Bar Kapara, when you talk about these things that Rabbi Kiva changed his mind, he did not change his mind with regard to Revi'as Dam. If you have a measurement of blood that came from 2 different dead people, Rabbi Kiva still holds its tamei. Sharei lemudai, Rabbi Kiva biyadai. The word of Rabbi Kiva was well known. Rabbi Kiva would continue to be mitame. Anytime Rabbi Kiva got this question, he was mitame. If he got blood from 2 different people. Obviously, Rabbi Kiva lived in time of a very murderous regime, so it wouldn't be surprising that such a question would come to him. And not only that, the pasuk seems to support the opinion of Rabbi Kiva of I'll call nafshes meis layavai. He shouldn't become tamei to nafshes meis, multiple people. How is that possible? It's the blood of multiple people that got mixed together. That also creates tumah. Not only that, Reb Shimon, one of his students, said, Omer, he would say, Ad yamav ha'imitame. He would say this as a joke. He would say that as long as he was alive, this is what he held. After he died, I don't know, maybe he changed his mind. Now, that was considered a very disrespectful joke. And when Reb Shimon recognized the disrespect of that joke, Tana, we learned, he fasted for a very long time and it caused his teeth to become black. To repent for this disrespectful joke. Okay. Toshma. Let's try to prove the point of whether or not you need a skull and a spine or a skull or a spine. The Tanya we learned, Bishame says, Roiva atzames min ha'atzamim. Oy mishnayim, oy mishleisha. 1 second. You need a measurement of bones from the different bones in the body, or it could even be from 2 or 3 bones. 1 second. Yeah, okay. Beishamai says, Roiva atzamis min atzam, Mishayim mishleisha. The measurement for Nazir to come Tameh is a Roiva atzamis. By the way, in the Mishnah, typically the Tumah of bones is a Roiva. For some reason, a Nazir needs to have a Chatzi Kav. I'm not 100% sure why that is.
That brings up the question. Would a normal person,
A normal person who's Tameh in Roiva, quarter of a Kav.
just the same as
But the Mishnah indicates that a Nazir would only have to cut his hair if it was a half a Kav. I'm not sure why that is that difference there. 1 second. So when Taisus here talks about, hold on. Okay, continue for now. Anyway, Bishamai says you can have even 2 or 3 bones that make a roiva hakav are sufficient to require a nazir to cut his hair. Basil says roiva min hagvia me roiva binyan me roiva minyan. You need to have this roiva hakav needs to be from bones that comprise most of a person's height or most of a person's bones. Okay. Amar Vishua, so Vishua said, "Yichalani las as divrei Beishamai divrei Beis Hillel ke'echad." I could combine the opinions of Beishamai and Beis Hillel to make it that they don't disagree. Shebeishamai Omer Mishnayim Omer Shleisha. When Beishamai says you become tamei with 2 or 3 bones, what type of bones are we talking about? Basically, either with 2 thighs and the upper pelvic bones, or it's with. Or the opposite would be the pelvic bones and a thigh and 1 thigh. The point is that with these 3 bones, you can quantify more than a person's height, most of a person's height. However, since the majority of a person's height, 1 second. However, in terms of height, Basil is talking about a scenario. So in other words, Basil would talk about roiv binyan. Most of a person's height would be the same as Beishamai, right? 2 thighs and the upper pelvic bones, or it would be a scenario of roiv minyan, which would be a majority of the bones, which would be. How would that happen? Where a person had the bones of both hands and both feet, which themselves would quantify 120 bones, you'd have to have 5 more. And that would be a majority of bones, even though it's a very small amount. Okay. Shammai says is that even a single bone of the skull or the 1 second, the skull or the spine would be enough to become tummy. Okay. So now what do we see here? We see clearly that Beishamai says that a single bone in the spine and the skull is enough. It's either or. Therefore, presumably, the opinion that disagrees with him says that the entire skull or the entire spine is enough, but not that you need to have both of them. So Mara says, no, not necessarily. Shiny Shammai demachmer. What is it here? Demachmer tfei. Shammai is extremely machmer, but it could be Beis Hillel actually holds. No, you need to have the skull and the spine. Okay. So Mara says, let's try to flip the proof the other direction. Liv Shemina. Let's try to figure out it as follows. Time in the Beis Shammai demachmer. The reason is because Beis Shammai is exceedingly machmer. Harabonon ad ikr shedra vigogailos. So. Okay, fine. So you'll say Beis Shammai is exceedingly machmer. Then, to the contrary, now you have proof that actually the Rabbanon hold that you would need both. You need the spine and the skull. The Gemara says no, not necessarily. Atkan le pli Rabbanon led the Shammai elab etzem echad da'asim min shedra umin agagailas. 1 second. Okay, so it's as follows. The Gemara says the rabbis only disagree with Beis Shammai when you have only one bone from the shedra or the gogolos. But maybe if the spine or the skull is complete, by maybe one of them alone would suffice. Second. Okay. We will stop here. Continue. So the question from Rachama will continue tomorrow. Or Rabbi Diskin will